So, recently, we have been thinking a lot about our own writing, what makes it special, things that we don't like, and how we convey our thoughts to our general audience. What we have especially been pondering over is something that we feel often can be skipped entirely from a script without losing anything substantial, while possibly even strengthening our points in the process. And we're not talking about how we can be long-winded sometimes or the way we repeat ourselves for clarity. We get the criticism, but we honestly think these are mostly nifty quirks of our own content that gives it that trademark transparency flair. What we're really talking about here is something that has cropped up for us while working on scripts several times and caused us to cut and rewrite more than we would have expected. Something that we think our mutual essay writers can probably relate to, and that is so deeply ingrained in how we discourse about pop culture that we might not even notice ourselves doing it. We've been having a bad case of what we'd like to call reviewer brain. And that's not an insult, mind you. It's simply an apt name for that phenomenon we've seen in both our own and several other creators' works. Once we explain it, you as viewers might suddenly notice it everywhere, while our fellow video essayists probably are a bit more intimately familiar with it. So, imagine you're writing your next big video about the existential dread of Bubsy 3D and its profound themes of melancholy. It's a deep and personal dive into the creative ego of people, an exploration of how perfection can never be reached no matter how hard you strive for it, and what truly constitutes art in the eyes of the observer. It's an interesting topic for you, and you're almost gushing about what the game has to say in its simplicity. But then, for whatever reason, you begin a new paragraph with words of dismissal, as if by obligation. And it goes something like,
I am not saying it's perfect.
What then follows is a detailed explanation of the ways that Bubsy 3D is commonly considered to be a bad game. You rip into the bad controls, the awful graphics, or perhaps even the comically abysmal camera that plague every single jump. You have indeed proven that despite your interesting and radical reading, the game is still just as shitty as it's ever been. Complete garbage trash. But how is this even relevant to what you were talking about? This isn't even close to being a review of any kind. In fact, you're engaging with Bubsy 3D in ways that actively reject that approach. And yet, here you are, basically doing just that. This is what we'd like to call a case of reviewer brain. A perceived need to make qualitative judgments about a piece of media, even if it might not even be all that necessary to your approach or framework. This applies to all forms of media writing, although for simplicity's sake, we will focus on video games in this video, because I guess we're a video game channel. Although that's not entirely true, but whatever, you know what I mean. The term reviewer brain can be referring to both positive and negative remarks, although the latter is clearly more common than the former. The main point is, however, that you're not aiming to present a review to the audience, but still feel compelled to add elements that are usually found within that format. And there are several different reasons for this, some of which we'd like to explore in this video. Mainly why we as creators do it, and the surrounding factors that encourage that kind of engagement with media in general. For us as YouTubers and essayists, it could be seen as an easy way to cover all our bases, hitting every single point until there is nothing that could possibly be scrutinized. After all, making videos on YouTube about your own opinions and inner thoughts inevitably puts you in a very vulnerable position, as the audience might be prone to misinterpret, latch onto things both said and unsaid, and poke holes in everything unless you're 150% clear in what you're saying. It's basically about anticipating incoming comments, deflecting them prematurely, and shielding yourself from shitty criticism that sucks. We'd rather stay out of conflict because it's just a bother, and no one really wants to deal with the drama over having their deep reading of Bubsy 3D be misinterpreted as them saying it's a perfect game, or even good for that matter. So adding caveats that specify this is often done to appease sections of the generalized audience, perhaps those who are used to overly comprehensive mega essays, or might just be especially peeved by us not mentioning the commonly cited negatives of a piece of videoed game. Anyone who has ever created a video on this platform knows that YouTube comments can be hell. So no matter what you say, you'll be primed to believe that there will be that one person who exclaims how wrong you are for not saying whatever they think is the correct way of viewing the matter. Maybe you were being too pretentious for them, or perhaps you were reading too much politics into their favorite game about tits ninjas or something. Heck, this perceived person might not even actually exist. But even if our attempts don't deter these specific people from defecating on our comment section, we may be inclined to add more caveats to our scripts because we wish to mitigate any possible damage, provided trademark gamers with enough fluff that'll keep them satisfied, so to speak. But it goes a bit deeper than that. We don't believe it to be just another personal choice and solely about keeping the comment section at bay. Sometimes we do it unconsciously, or at least without thinking much about it. And this is more so caused by a cultural phenomenon that influences how we talk about media on the internet on the most fundamental of levels, and has dominated that discourse since basically forever. The fact is that, for better or worse, the product review is the standard way we engage with a lot of media and through which we understand it. This is especially noticeable with a medium like video games, which, despite its young age, has grown to become the biggest entertainment industry on the planet, while still struggling with the need to be taken seriously as more than just time-wasting play. Ever since the dedicated gaming magazine established itself, the review in the sense of evaluating on a metric scale, expressing the pros and cons, weighing the good and bad, has been one of the most prominent ways we talk about video games on a professional, more elaborate level. While often simplified to be consumer guides for what to buy or avoid, reviews have gained the cultural role of establishing and maintaining the canon and narrative of important works. In a sense, reviews may be the most legitimate form of games writing. It's the position that lets you write about the newest stuff and take a part in shaping the cultural relevance of it. Look up any game on Wikipedia and the bottom section will be dedicated to critical reception. The field is elevated to being one of the core tenets for defining works within the medium. It's undoubtedly a position of power within the cultural landscape. The mere existence of Metacritic as a source for aggregated review scores quite adequately shows how important it is for the general gaming audience to establish what is to be considered good or bad. We're supposed to be able to line them up all neatly, rank them from best to worst, and come to some sort of conclusion based on that. In other words, this culture puts a lot of emphasis on critical numbers and value statements, above much else. To a large extent, this form of games writing, or rather this being the normative view on games writing, will be an unconscious factor when we both write and evaluate other people's writing on the subject. You may think the connection is strange and misplaced, but truth be told, the line between a review and an essay is surprisingly blurry. What started out as one can easily find itself becoming the other through free-form stream of consciousness writing. They're both about selling arguments to the reader or viewer, so it really isn't unexpected that the two would share much of the same DNA. Especially on YouTube, where the post-AVGN video review boom more or less branched out and evolved into new genres, the video essay being one of them. In other words, definitions are vague and distinctions can be confusing. This will mean that without establishing clarity, we may drift between these two forms of writing unconsciously and conflate them subconsciously. The effect being how this seeps into our writing because we for some reason perceive that the argument we're making is somehow about the quality of the subject and not whatever it is we're actually talking about. It should be noted that this is something that happens in all kinds of directions. While we as creators may be struck with a personal case of reviewer brain, it's not uncommon to sometimes stumble upon the comment. You know the one. Someone watched your Nietzschean reading of Donkey Kong Country 3 and promptly responded with, "Wow, that was a really great review." It may feel baffling that they'd conflate the two forms of writing, but as we've explained here, it's not really surprising because of the connection they share. It doesn't even have to be so severe. It could just be something like a slight implication that you simply forgot to mention that Bubsy 3D is bad actually. Or that you're being too harsh to Metroid Prime by presenting it through the specific framework of how Metroid Fusion's narrative functions on an intertextual level. This is not personal at all. As such, the way norms shape our slight misunderstandings of video essays will prompt us to quite simply engage with them as other forms of writing that they probably aren't. It would seem that we have all been inevitably influenced by the status quo and the standards of talking about pop media. In a certain sense, it's inescapable. So what is the conundrum here? Why are we concerned enough to write a silly video about this? Well, it's simply because we've noticed how this affects our own writing. And when we realized that, we started noticing everyone else doing it as well. Writing great thought pieces of media that they're obviously passionate about, and then being consumed by these pesky perceived obligations of giving both pros as well as cons. Of being balanced. It muddies our points and confuses what the actual subject is. At the most extreme, it may even limit what we feel allowed to say. Can you brave the publicly accepted narratives with confidence without placing yourself in the line of fire? Do you have the energy to even do so? Or will your piece be fraught with a myriad of excuses and justifications because you simply cannot be bothered with bad faith arguments? It's too much of a bother, and we get why this would happen even consciously. We just think it's a shame. So, is this bad? Does this mean we hate reviews? Well, no, obviously not. We're pals with several people who do YouTube reviews. Hell, we're even writing reviews ourselves on the side. It's just different forms of writing that cannot be either good or bad. Gosh, I'm almost sensing a pattern here. But what if someone watches this and has the takeaway that transparency has an obnoxiously radical perception of the relationship between reviews and essays? What if they conflate that as us saying our form of writing is the superior one and shouldn't be tainted by the lesser? Imagine if someone were to think that about us because we didn't clarify that we're not approaching the idea with ill intent. You see what we mean? Why are we so predisposed to assume and prepare for the worst? It's exhausting. What we have realized through this is how our writing is shaped by norms. But more importantly, how our writing will also reshape norms. Any sort of writing, be it review or essay, will in some sense affect the public narrative of our subjects. It's like a tug of war that we seem to be quick to forfeit because the opposition is everyone else. So we submit. The original Sonic the Hedgehog was totally a bit compromised by not having the spin dash. Marble Zone breaks the pacing, I guess. 3 acts makes every world overstate its welcome. I've heard the special zones are bad, although I actually quite liked— oh shit, wait, that wasn't supposed to! The point is that people shouldn't feel obligated to add caveats where they don't really belong. When you're writing your thorough thematic character analysis of Shadow the Hedgehog throughout the entire series, and then get to Sonic 06, Do you really have to pull the brakes and explain that this is actually a shitty ass game that sucks balls and is broken beyond redemption? Does that even matter? What does that have to do with anything? Shadow takes off his inhibitor rings and skates through an entire army of Mephiles clones. This is right after Shadow has decided that even if the entire human race will despise and go after him, he will still fight for them anyway. What's the significance of pointing out how you can stand upside down in the loop-de-loops in that scenario? Of course, this is a very severe example, but this is what happens when you have a bad case of reviewer brain. Your path of confidence meets with infamy, and you just sort of fall into the urge of defending yourself from nothing. This is not to say that you can never do this, that you can never add review-like aspects to your essay, or, I guess, essay-like aspects to your review. This has to be done on a case-by-case basis after all, but our message to you is simple. Contemplate if what you're saying is your opinion, or something you just assume that people will want to hear. Do the caveats you're planning to add even matter to what you're saying? Maybe it's fine to leave the boring and intrusive stuff out. Be bold. Be personal. Don't let narratives weigh you down if your opposition to them could be the deciding factor in challenging the preconceived norms. After all, when you're writing a video essay, you're forming an argument. Perhaps the smartest thing to do in that situation is to shape your text so as to best reflect what you want to convey, even if it may ruffle some feathers. So go against the grain, be radical, don't be afraid that the imaginary mob would be upset about you being disingenuous about something as trivial as video games. Someone will probably always be there to misinterpret what you say anyway, out of sheer disagreement. It's all about focused writing that reflects what you, the writer, care about. That's the sort of stuff we'd like to see more of. Be wild. Be free. And with that, we're at the end of the video. We would of course like to thank our patrons who make all of this possible. First off, we'd like to introduce some newcomers. Ali Omar, Shilmill, Liam Q, and Matthew Arrowwood. Thank you all. We would also like to give a very extra special thanks to our top tier backers. They are Andrew Jones, All Purpose Nobody, Afayette, Ben Clark, Bibi the Bitch, Cult of Diana, Ember, Emrasa, Gage McColgan, Joel Nilsson, Klaus Morals, Luke, Matthias Graman, Meowmix64, Mary Mello, Mosling, Nate Kiernan, Nishsvet, Radar of the Stars, TB Skyen, Vox, Abigail Nail, Amanda Rönne Idenge, Andreas, Anonymous, Eric Parkinson, Basklin, Billy Moran, Botch Frivarg, Kathleen Thomas, Charles Goldhaver, Chloe Strange, Cody Sis, Eli Berg Moss, Ephemeral Mist, Floof Fist, Indigo Trans, Yay Mission, Leinen, Marika, Mar B, Max Miller, Mitch Haley, Nathan Schaff, Never Haunting You, Rivokas Magma, Scott from Nerdsync, Silly Rookie, Skyhoppers, Sweet Pink, Sylvar Rigota, Tobias Mattsson, VG, Whimsim, and C33. Once again, thank you all for your kind support. This one was a bit shorter, but to be honest, the Metroid video really hit us hard, so we kind of had to just pull it back a little bit. But next month should be something really special, we think. It's something we're really excited about anyway. And after that, something else that's really cool. But we're not gonna tell you because it's a secret.